Good morning. Welcome to the West Valley Center for Spiritual Living. I'm Reverend Karen Rice, and I'm sitting in a chair again. And if it appears that we have gone backwards, because truly I am sitting in the sanctuary of our beautiful center, and there are only 3 other people here with me, and there's a reason for that. So I would begin by saying, in the great wise words of Jesus, the great teacher, do not judge by appearances. This is still forward motion, because in life, growth is always 2 steps forward and a step backwards. So we're just in a period of constriction while our building is under construction. So the circumstances of the day are this. We don't have any air conditioning, and it's rather warm. We've discouraged people from attending in person, and I'm really, really grateful to Julie and Cheryl and Sue Witter for being here, sitting in an unusual environment that's a little toasty, but we're going to pull it off, and we're trying some new technical stuff just because we had to. But you know what? The pandemic made us know how creative and resourceful we can be. Somebody said early on in the pandemic, do not waste a perfectly good pandemic to figure out how to do this well, because this is a good way we are called to rise higher, and that's what we're doing right now. So let me just get us grounded with a little prayer, since I'm a solo act today. I'm just going to take a moment to turn within myself and to realize that in all circumstances, in all places, under all conditions, and moving through all situations, right where we are, God is, and this day is no different. And so the message that has been prepared and will be given is a message of relevance that will probably be enhanced by these conditions. So I am grateful just to know that the show does go on. I say thank you, God, I let it be, and so it is. Amen. So the title of my message this morning is Guided by Love. And it's always so amusing to me that I pick those topics well in advance. I even pick my theme quotes, and not knowing, that we would be doing this on this day. But listen to the words of this quotation that was my theme, excellent theme quotation, so relevant for what we're doing. The words are of Ernest Holmes, and they come from the book This Thing Called You. And here's what Holmes said. You are starting out on a great adventure, a wonderful journey. You are guided by love. You are guided by love. You are inspired by truth, and your future will be what you make it. So that sort of takes my breath away at the end of that sentence, because that then really shows us, it gives that theme of everything that we believe and what we teach and how we attempt to live our lives. And so I am very certain that we have been guided by love into this very day, where we are indeed on the edge of this great adventure, where we are stepping into something brand new, which in a week, or maybe a little longer than a week, we will have air conditioning circulating in the entire building again, and even then, our future will only be what we make it. And you know what? We're up for it. We already know that. We know how to do that. So how amazing to be living in principle, to have this evidence of everything we've done this year, to be living in principle through these changing times. It's like, for me, it's like a way I've seen the effectiveness of the teaching and the work that we've done. Because today, actually, June 21st, by the way, happy Father's Day to all you dads and all the people that bring that father spirit onto the planet. But it is also the longest, possibly in Phoenix the hottest, the longest day of the year, because it's the summer solstice. And on the summer solstice, in addition to Father's Day this year, we are celebrating Reverend Clyde Gowen's birthday. So he is off celebrating his birthday and hopefully having a really great time. We love you, Reverend Clyde. Thank you for all the gifts you bring to our community. And by the way, I have other friends who are celebrating birthdays today too, and so I extend my love to you as well. And how wonderful to stop, to pause, and to recognize yet again that we are making the future what we want it to be. So when I think about, I was going to also mention that this is the actual day last year, 1 year ago today, that we completed the painting of the exterior of the building, the actual date that we completed that. So what I wanted to do is, as I reflected on that a little bit, I wanted to mention that there was a period of time when we were just kicking off the campaign to get the building painted, where I said, from the pulpit, I actually said, it's important for us to love the building before we step into doing the work of getting the painting done. We have to stop and love the building and give thanks for this legacy that's been given to us. And I even said this one funny thing. You need to go across the street later, get in your car, drive across the street, park there, and look back at the church, because at close up, you could see the cracks and the way the paint was peeling. But when you went across the street, the building looked beautiful because we had a bigger perspective. And so I asked people to do that. I gave the homework assignment for the week was do that sometime this week. Go over there, look at this building, see how beautiful it is, and just love the building. And I want to say that touches my heart in remembering those ideas I had back then before we had the means to get the building painted. We didn't know how it was going to happen. But I began to predict it would be done by the spring, so imagine how satisfied I was when it was complete on, the last day of spring or the first day of summer. What a great, huge accomplishment that felt like. And this year, we have expanded that in an even greater way. So what I want to say is, when we are called to love first, because love is the first impulse of all creation. So when we move ourselves to love first, no matter what it is going on in our life or in our relationships, it doesn't matter, a health issue, a financial issue, when you pause and just love, you generate a different kind of energy that then moves things into form in a beautiful way. So I wanted to talk today about that person in our lives, Dr. Ernest Holmes, who is the founding father of this teaching, the science of mind. And I wanted to just give you a little bit of his history, and that is that he was the youngest born of 9 children born to Anna and William Holmes. They lived upstate Maine. They lived in a little town called Lincoln, Maine, and they had a very humble farm, and Dad wasn't really all that good at farming. And by the way, of the 9 children that were born, they were all boys, and Ernest Holmes was the youngest of all the children. But what I wanted you to know about the history of this man, a little bit about his family, to help you understand how this philosophy came to be, is that his parents were very dedicated to bringing up all 9 of those kids in a spiritual environment. And so they read the Bible every day, every night before they went to bed. They read the Bible as a family together. They went to church on Sunday. They hitched up the wagon and drove 2 miles to the local church, and they attended church there. They created a spiritual atmosphere in their home that would encourage their sons to grow up and be open-minded. But they also, Anna and William, the parents, had a certain sensitivity to something they referred to as religious dualism. They were very clear they did not want the boys raised in an environment, a spiritual environment, where there was good and evil. And for that reason, they didn't project any image of hell or Satan the devil as an entity that was out to get their soul. They actually, it's written that Anna and William objected to the idea that God and the devil could be in competition for our souls. And so they were really thoughtful about the way they brought spirituality, even the Bible, into the lives of their sons. Now, that probably would not be unusual. I don't know this for sure, but they suggest that in that same region in Maine and in the New England states, that was the same time period when transcendentalism was beginning to get a foothold. And so the transcendentalists were very open-minded. Emerson brings us work from that sort of theme of thinking. And the transcendentalists did these wonderful, courageous things, like they challenged some of the societal views. They took a stand against women's suffrage, and some of them were vegetarians, and they questioned the things that people were taught routinely in church, like such as hellfire. Would there be a loving God that would torment a soul in the eternal pain of a hellfire? Is there a devil? Could that be possible, that there's an opposing force to God? Are we born in sin? So these were all questions they were looking at. They were looking for new ideas. And so you can see that this influence was strongly embedded in this young man, Ernest Holmes, who was a curious spiritual seeker all of his life. And he had a beautiful way of communing in a very personal and intimate way with that infinite intelligence of the universe that to him was more than God. It was the creator of all of life, and it had a lot of names, but he was so free of the dogma that he wrote once that he was a full-grown man before he actually realized there were full-grown adults who believed in an entity called Satan the devil, and it made him laugh. It was so far-fetched to him that any human could believe in such a silly thing. And I love that story. The other story that I wanted to leave you with today is a time where I forgot my book. Would you run and get the Ernest Holmes? My copy's probably sitting on the table. So sorry, make you get up and walk in the heat to the hotter heat. So there's this fabulous story about a time where it was Sunday morning, and they were ready to go to church, and for some reason, Mother Anna stayed home with probably a sick kid or something. So Dad goes out and he hitches the wagon to the horse to the wagon, and the boys climb in the back of the wagon. Thank you very much. And they go to church, and on that particular day, the minister was all wound up, and his sermon was all about the hellfire stuff, and it was really uncomfortable for the father of these boys, who the mom and the dad did not like their boys being exposed to all of that stuff. And so the minister was saying, you're nothing more than worms, and as worms you're doomed to decay, and he was doing all this negative old traditional hellfire kind of sermon, and the dad was not happy. Dad didn't say anything. Gets the kids after the sermon, they get back in the wagon, and they're heading back to home, and they get about halfway home. They lived about 2 miles from church, so they're about halfway home, and father tells the horse to get a little bit off the road, and he loosens the reins so that the horse can eat some of the grass, and then he turns around, and he has this really unhappy look on his face, and he says to the boys, "You are not worms." He said, Jesus said, "Ye are gods, and you are like God if you keep yourself that way, and you need to know you are not worms." So it's so entertaining to me that I wanted to read you this one paragraph that comes right out of the book of Holmes telling the story. This is a book called Ernest Holmes, His Life and Times. He co-wrote this book with his brother Fenwick. So some of it was written after Holmes made his transition, but he wanted an accurate biography of his life, so he contributed a great deal of what we're reading. So here's something he had to say. "Never before had I seen Father that angry, for he was almost docile when Mother was around, but now his face was tense, his voice was loud, and he repeated fiercely, 'It's a lie! It's a big darned lie!' And then, as though the subject were settled for a time, he turned around, he clucked to the horse and said, 'Giddy up,' and we drove home." So the story goes on to say that when they got home, he had a few words with Mother, and she calmed him down and said, don't talk, not in front of the boys, don't let the boys see you that angry, and all the things that were important to her. But you can see how it impacted all of those men grew up to be, really beautiful contributors to society in positive ways. And you can see how the environment that the parents created and the way that they educated those boys really made an impact on them, particularly Ernest Holmes. As the founding father of our teaching, Dr. Holmes saw the role of Jesus. He viewed the ministry of Jesus as it's written in the Gospels. He saw that as foundational to our teaching. Everything starts from there. But he saw Jesus as someone who demonstrated the Christ consciousness. He gave us a model for how we can live our lives. So Holmes, we often say that he was, as Holmes said, Jesus was not the exception. He was the example. And we too want to emulate the way that he lived his life. And Holmes believed that, and I really love this part. Holmes believed that the function of Christ is not to rescue sinners, but the function of the idea of Christ is to empower people, to teach us as individuals how to move through the foibles of life and to watch our own emotions and to not see wrong or right, but to see that we're in choice and to see that we do impact the well-being of our circumstances and other people based on how we respond to all the things that we go through. So Holmes was very clear in saying that Jesus came to teach us about love. That's why we're speaking today about being guided by love. That Jesus came to tell us that yes, you will have some bumps in the road, that sometimes you're going to have to forgive each other, but do that. And he came to show us that it's important to care for other people even when they're different than we are. I think the problem is that we don't know how to be human. And I believe the answer to that is in this teaching, and that was the guidance that Holmes intended to bring us by creating an educational a method of spirituality with skills that we can use and a way to study and a way to practice in order to have a more intimate relationship with Spirit itself. So when our goal is to be guided by love, when we are able to see how precious life is, when we practice those examples that were given by the great teacher, then we make choices that are different than when we don't. And that explains the presence of evil on the planet, that not everybody puts love first. Not everybody can stand in that place of looking for an experience of peace while you're living your life on the planet. And so bad things happen. We had something locally happen a few days ago that was stunning for our little city. And yet we know that when we are guided by love, when we prioritize that in our spiritual path, when we make an effort to commune with the divine and to appreciate the preciousness of life, then we don't do harm to other people. And that's what I wanted to say today. When our goal is to be guided by love, we become more loving. And that's the bottom line. And then we can hopefully then be in that place of forgiving the circumstances, like having to do Sunday morning without air conditioning and all those other things, and move on, right? And move on and let our love be a healing gift to the planet. I think it's important to say, before I wrap up today, it's important to say that toward the end of Ernest Holmes' life, in the last decade of his life, in that time period where he wrote and published This Thing Called You, This Thing Called Life, which was later renamed The Art of Life. Those books were published between 48 and early 50s. his tone in the voice of the way he's bringing forward truths, his tone was different. And the people around him, and if you listen to his lectures, because a lot of his lectures from that time period are recorded, what we see is that he changed his emphasis from the, if you look at what he wrote in 1919, it was quite different from the way he wrote and published and spoke in 1950. So the world had changed, but the man had changed because he believed in that idea of the ever-expanding evolution, that we are always expanding in our knowledge, and when we know better, we do better, and that there's this upward-bound destiny, almost, he wouldn't have used that term, in the way that we progress through life. And I believe that's what's happening on the planet right now. And yes, maybe we have been 2 steps forward, and now we're a step back, so we look pretty regressed. And I would say that we want to ride that wave, and we want to be guided by love, and we want to make a conscious effort to do that. At the end of his life, Dr. Holmes articulated very clearly, that he believed the most important work he brought, the most important thing to remember about the entire teaching could be summed up in the idea of having a relationship with the presence of God. Having a personal relationship with the presence of God. So he said there's love and there's law, or sometimes he would say there's the presence and there's the law, but they work together. You cannot separate them and expect what can happen when you put them together. Love is the impulse, right? Then love molds into form and activates the law to do that work of creation. But you can't have one without the other. And so what changes our lives the most is the way we understand and relate to the presence of God. So yes, we want to use the law, but that was not his first command. In fact, let me tell you that here's a quote from the same book, His Life and Times, but these are his words. Oh, I'm sorry, they're not his words. These are Fenwick's words. And Fenwick said, Ernest made it crystal clear that the objective of this teaching was not to encourage a dramatic experience. In other words, I really think that I know people that are still meditating, hoping for that moment of bliss, or that transcending, that out of body. So we can think that, but Holmes was very clear. He was not encouraging a dramatic experience, but a constant awareness of the presence, right? Because that's where the atmosphere of thought in our own mind is impacted. He cautioned, these are important words, he cautioned against losing the presence in the practice of the principle. Don't lose the presence while you're out there practicing how to work the law. Because if you practice the principle without the presence, something freezes up. When I read that, I immediately thought of how in the early 2000s, when the law of attraction became kind of new age trendy, and everybody was like on it, like, whoa, look at what can happen to your life if you use the law. But they didn't anchor themselves in the presence first. They missed the whole point. So yeah, we are powerful beings. We can manifest. And look, we do. But when we do that based on love, when we are guided by love, then everything is different. So, and the other thing I wanted to mention, this was really, it feels important to me to say this out loud. Holmes published his first book in 1919. Think of what was going on in the world between 1919 and 1950 or so when he quit publishing works. He had experienced all the traumatic changes that were going on in the world and in this country, from the First World War to the Spanish flu to the Second World War, the Depression, think of all the stuff that he saw, and yet in his writings, he seldom spoke of current events. And when he did, he was very careful to do it in a productive way. So I totally get this idea. It's easy to imagine. He was not the kind of guy that would look at something awful that happened in the world, tisk his tongue, shake his head, or shake a finger at the evil-minded people that did bad things. That was not who this man was, and that is not what this teaching is about. I think that it's relevant to notice that Holmes never spoke against people. He would never shame anybody. He would not make anybody look bad. At the end of his life, even though we know this is a remarkable human being, at the end of his life, he was very insistent that we not put him up on a pedestal. He said, if you make me a saint, I will come back and haunt you. He did not want that to happen, and that's why he wanted to write his own autobiography. He wanted to be a part of the biography that would preserve the truths in the way that they were. He was a real human, and yes, he was kind and loving and sociable, but he had his own, flaws as well. And he wasn't ashamed of that. He just always worked every day like a fresh day. And so he said, do not, he was concerned about the work continuing, but he did not want to ever be an idol or idolized. He said it's like this. If you put your finger in a glass of water and you take your finger out of a glass of water, what impression is left? See, the individual doesn't matter. But the teaching did matter to him, and he did want that preserved, and he did want it to continue. So, in fact, he was so private that he kept his burial place a secret because he did not want the public making a shrine out of his grave. And I think that speaks a lot to the humility of this great, great human being. So I thought it would be appropriate to end on this sultry morning. Is that the right word? It's hot. It's a little sticky in here. I wanted to read you a paragraph where we hear his regard for what was important to him as the future, in terms of our future and the future of religious science. Ernest's concern for the future was strictly in regard to the preservation of the purity of the message. Gosh, that's all I want to do, is be that minister that says it. Of course, I'm going to say it in my own voice, and I have my own biases, but I want to be that minister that preserves the purity of the message. Unlike the Hebrew prophets who forecast only what would happen unless, Ernest forecast what would happen if. Do you feel the opposite of that? It wasn't this, it was like, but what if? The prophet said, in effect, unless you change, the nation will perish. And Ernest said, if you keep the purity of truth, the future is secure. I hope that you will join me in keeping the purity of truth, or just the consistent way we get together on Sunday mornings to remember those deep, eternal truths, which this amazing man took from his, not only his upbringing, but his education and study of all spiritual traditions. He always looked for that golden thread of truth. So let us be guided by love. In fact, let us be guided by love in some words of prayer right now. So I invite you, wherever you are, in comfort of your nice, cool home, to just take a breath and settle in, because we're going to pray. And it's pretty easy to turn within right now and to feel that essence of being guided by love. For something within me has stirred, and there is a fresh awareness in this minister's mind of the purity and the truth of this message, of the eternal truth of life in this consistent way that life goes on, and we continue to prove it again and again. I feel that love of God within me, And I know it is indeed that activity of life moving and pulsing and breathing with no circumstance prohibiting the goodness of life to reveal itself right now. And so I speak a word of blessing for this spiritual community, for the gratitude that is overflowing in my heart for this tremendous gift of updating our building so that we have a strong foundation to teach this philosophy, to bring truth to the world and to remind people about the value of courting the presence of God. I feel that love stirring within me. I recognize that truth being that which flows and thrives on the spoken word. We are in that current now, and so we are open to receive all the good gifts, and that means that we as individuals open ourselves as vessels to receive the good, to have that experience of healing that which ails us, of revealing the wholeness and the completeness of our physical being, of our relationships. We open our hearts now to that experience of forgiveness. We open ourselves to receive the good, our good, that in the universe which is heading toward us even right now. And we say yes to life. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. How grateful I am for this and for so much more. And for the day where we honor the founding father of this beautiful philosophy, where we can just allow him to rest in peace and now carry forward this great and pure truth. For we do good work in the world when we do the work ourselves. Thank you, God. Thank you, life. I simply let it be. And together, wherever we are, we say, and so it is. Have a profoundly blessed week. We will be doing exactly this from the chair again next Sunday, I think. It's possible we'll have air conditioning, but it's a little too close, so I'm going to ask you to just enjoy the comfort of your home. We'll resume on July 4th as our first Sunday in our brand new building. And then on July 11th, I have something special planned. I can't wait to tell you about it later. I love you. I love you. Remember, pray often and love much. Bye.